welcome again to After Dark for their first full show for 1984. A happy New Year to you all, by the way, if we weren't talking to you last week, which was, of course, New Year's Eve. I hope you had a good week, the first week of 84. We've got some nice people to look at tonight. We'll look back at some of the best portions of last year's show over the next few weeks, in fact. And tonight we'll talk with Billy Thorpe. We'll talk to the Hollies. We'll have a talk to Andrew Newton. We'll say hello to John Cale again. Jello Biafra, that's the guy out of the Dead Kennedys. The Globos, John Swan will be back in with us. Ed Bicknell, who managed Dire Straits. Megan Williams. And a thing that we did earlier last year that was a bit of a highlight for us here in the team anyway. It was the After Dark coverage of the Playmate of the Year. That comes up shortly. Now you know why I said it was a highlight. Short Memory will be first up, Midnight Oil, and then we'll have a look at a great oldie, The Loved One by The Loved Ones. Again, welcome to After Dark 84. The Gumleaf Mafia, as it was termed a few years ago. Does that still exist? Is there any such thing?
There was, yeah. It was an American guy from one of the record companies, I think, coined the phrase. It was just a bunch of Australians, expatriates that used to get together every week and have a drink some beers and exchange stories, you know, try and make contacts, because we're all really trying to make it. It was like Brian Cadd and Stevie Kipner, and Renee later. Russell Morris was living there at that stage. Darryl Cotton and his ex-lady Fleur Fameyer, who makes all the clothes for Olivia, and just, you know, people from record companies, Don Henderson, who now runs EMI there, and it was kind of a common watering hole, because we were all pretty much strangers and all trying to break in at the same time, and it was somewhere where you knew you could go and see some familiar faces and talk about, you know, about Australia.
And that is not happening now?
Not to the same degree. It's not a regular thing like it was. It was always at somebody's house just about every week, you know. Everybody's pretty much doing something now. Brian's back here, of course, and Russell's back here. Stevie Kipner's now co-written 2 number ones for Olivia, and I think Daryl's back here. I travel a lot in the States. Everybody's kind of involved in doing things, so the opportunity to come together that regularly doesn't exist, but we still see a lot of each other.
Is England the biggest country number one record-wise for you, or was America strong, or was Australia slightly larger, or which country?
Well, I suppose England has more than anywhere else, but America was strong. They had the majority of the, you know, the things like the bus stops and carry-ons and honour carousels in the early days, and of course the Air That I Breathe and The Ain't Heavy. They're all hits in America. Also, in fact, Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress, which was a hit pretty much everywhere in the world except for England. There is a reason for that. It was at the period where Alan Clark left the band, and we were in this situation where we brought in this Swedish fella called Michael Rickfors.
Right.
And we had a record out with him called The Baby, and we, you know, I mean, we killed Long Cool Woman in England purposely. We wouldn't promote it or anything, which, on looking back, it was a stupid thing to do, really. I mean, they all know it's our song, and I suppose, whereas, I mean, it probably sold as many as it would have done as a hit record, except it happened over a longer period of time, you know.
Chart for you.
Yeah.
It must be a really fantastic thing to look back and say, well, there, He Ain't Heavy. Oh, remember we were in Canada at the time, which people at home would no doubt do when they hear those records being played again on radio. Do you have any one visual thing in the brain that comes back off one song?
Well, you mentioned You Ain't Heavy. I mean, I don't know if this is what you're meaning. The funny part of that song is it's an accident that we ever recorded it. The reason being, I still do go around publishing houses if we need songs, looking around for songs and things. And I went to this publishing house in London, a fella called Cyril Shane, bless his heart, and he was a fella who used to go off to Italy in various places and come back with all these typical songs which were from song festival type songs. So he'd play you these songs which were really corny, sort of typical got to get it over in one play songs, and he'd stand behind you with his arm around you virtually, and he'd be singing the English lyric in your ears, you're hearing those songs, and they were terrible. So I'd say, right, okay, Cyril, I'll, you know, I'm just going out the door. He says, all right, he says, desperation move. He says, I've got one song here for the, you know, which, have a listen to it. He says, it's probably not for you. And he played You Ain't Heavy's My Brother. And it probably just stood out so much because at least it was a song. If he played it amongst a load of others, it would probably have well, no, I think I probably would have spotted it, but it's, you know. So the point being, occasionally I'd go in to see him again and he'd play all this rubbish and things, but sure enough, every time I went out the door, he'd say, I've got one more for you, but they were always rubbish from then on.
So there was no more He Ain't Heavies.
No.
Wouldn't it have been nice if there was? You could just go in, listen to the crap, and then go to the door and know you were going to get a hit.
Shook my head out of dreams, reality's calling. The early bird's been out all morning, but I've got no notion of moving from where I am. Well, my legs won't move, I feel disabled. I'm on a shelf, an article labeled, waiting for someone to fetch me from lost and found. I'm down, I wanna hear me calling. I'm down, I wanna see me falling.
I'm not allowed to let Andrew do any of his hypnotism.
That's right.
With the word, on telly in Australia because it's against the law.
That's right. And there's also a very good reason for it, because I did a job in a hotel in England, and they piped it up to all the rooms. Yeah. And after the show, they had to seal the hotel off because we found people in the broom cupboards thinking they were chickens and trying to lay eggs and all that. So if we did it on TV now, you get people at home falling asleep and doing all sorts of things. So that's why they have the rule, you know, that we're not allowed to do it on TV.
When you wake up, you'll find I have a very special pair of glasses in my pocket. Whenever you look through the glasses, you, madam, you're going to be able to see all the fellas in the audience with no clothes on. And have a good look round and we'll see what we can see.
If you can imagine that your hands are getting stuck tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and being totally stuck together as if they were stuck in a vice, and maybe when you open your eyes, of course you'll be able to open your eyes, but you'll find it absolutely impossible to open your hands. In fact, I would say that the more you try to open your hands, the more impossible it will be. So, let's give it a try, but you have to imagine that they're stuck together with glue.
That really is true.
So you just have to imagine. And that proves what I always say on the show, because it's purely...
I can't get them undone.